Hello everybody, and thank you for joining us for this, what's going to be the final session in our Land Connection Conference 2021. My name is Shona Glenn, and I'm going to be hosting the session this afternoon. I head up the Scottish Land Commission's Policy and Research team, and the session is going to be all about the Scottish Government's new Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme. I've also got a colleague, Claire and Jess, in the background who are going to be helping make sure the IT goes smoothly. So thanks to Claire and Jess for that. Now, for those of you who aren't aware of the background to this, the Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme is a brand new fund that was announced last December in response to the recommendations from Scotland's National Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force. The purpose of this session today is to raise awareness about the new fund primarily, and what the panel is looking for when it's assessing its applications. And the idea of that is to help all you guys out there to put together some really fantastic applications for the next round of funding. Now, to do that, it's going to be really important that we hear from you. So I really do want to encourage everybody to make good use of the chat as we go through the session, and to ask questions and to connect with other participants. We'll start with a short introduction from the Minister, Tom Arthur, and we'll then hand over to Michael Kerr and Harry Brickell from the Scottish Government's Regeneration Unit to tell us a bit more about the fund and how it works. We're then going to go over to Deryck Irving from the Green Action Trust, who's going to tell us a little bit about the kind of support that's available to help bring applications forward. And then Adam Wallace from South Lanarkshire Council and John Bachtler, who's the chair of the Clyde Cycle Park, are going to tell us a bit more about their experience of being involved in one of the first successful applications to the fund.
Thank you to Andrew Finn and the Land Commissioners for the invitation to speak on the third day of the 2021 Scottish Land Commission Conference. Sorry I am not able to be with you in person at the event or able to take part in the panel discussion. I am delighted to appear, however, as part of the Land and Communities Day, following on from my colleague Mary McCallan, who opened the conference on Monday. Land and communities are at the heart of so much of what we do in the Scottish Government alongside our Green Party colleagues, and both land and communities have a fundamental role to play in all parts of my portfolio. In relation to public finance, I await with interest the forthcoming tax work that the Commission will shortly be publishing. With regards to planning, I read with fascination the recent recommendations on land availability for housing. It is imperative that we bring fresh thinking and innovation to meet the housing needs of Scottish citizens. And as the first ever Scottish Minister with Community Wealth Building in my title, I feel that I should have gatecrashed the event yesterday on this very topic. I'm here today, however, to talk to you about our groundbreaking £50 million low carbon vacant and derelict land investment programme. The programme was announced by the Scottish Government in December last year, and we were pleased to open it to the first round of applications earlier this year. It was launched in response to the excellent work of the Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force that was initiated by Rosanna Cunningham and led by the Commission alongside SEPA. The Scottish Government has welcomed the Task Force's report and recommendations, and work is underway to respond to those more broadly. The Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme complements our existing investment in support of place-based regeneration across Scotland and has green recovery at its heart. It will support regeneration in some of Scotland's most disadvantaged areas, and therefore underpins the importance we have placed on ensuring a just transition to net zero. And I was delighted to announce the first round of grant awards totaling just over £5 million on the 10th of September. These projects are wide-ranging and exciting and demonstrate the momentum that is now behind the work we are doing to bring back land to positive use. These include the creation of a new riverside green space in my hometown of Barhead, a cycle park and active travel hub on 8.25 hectares site in South Lanarkshire, and the transformation of a derelict site in Easterhouse into a wildlife habitat that the local community will be able to access for education and leisure purposes. These represent great examples of derelict sites being transformed from eyesores into vibrant green spaces for our communities. Reusing our land and property assets in this way has umpteen benefits, from supporting regeneration, creating jobs, and contributing to our efforts against climate change. The next round of funding is now open to stage 1 applications by 12 November, and I am grateful for the work that is going on between local authorities, communities and other partners to bring forward more innovative proposals forward. I very much look forward to the subsequent announcements over the next 5 years, and not just announcing them, but seeing the results of the investment for decades to come. I hope you'll enjoy this workshop and have a lively discussion. My officials are on the panel and keen to hear your views and your questions. So all the best, and I hope to get an invitation to the Community Wealth Building event at next year's conference.
Great. Well, that was a great introduction from the Minister, so thanks for that. And I've definitely taken the hint that he'd like to be involved in our community wealth building work going forward, so that's great. And I'm going to hand over to Michael and Harry now to tell us a bit more about the fund. And now, both Michael and Harry have got very long job titles, but they both worked within the Regeneration unit of the Scottish Government. So, and they've both been instrumental in setting up the new fund and getting it operational. So, Michael, over to you, please, to tell us a bit more how it's working.
Thanks, Shona. I have a slide pack that hopefully will appear soon. We've got a 10-minute slot to cover this fund at a fairly high level, which we'll try and do in that time slot. So yeah, of course, we're here to talk about the low carbon vacant and derelict land investment programme. As has been said a few times already on this call, it's a £50 million fund over the next 5 years. Claire, could you please pop up the next slide? So in this 10-minute slot, the presentation will cover just a brief history of the fund, how we've got to this moment today and looking ahead, the strategic context and aims and objectives of the fund. I've included a separate item in the budget profile because there are a couple of things to say about that. The application process, we'll give a bit of an overview of how people can apply to the fund, how that runs, and an update on the current timeline and the forward look in terms of delivering the fund in the future. So next slide, please, Claire. So this first slide is a brief history of the new fund. I thought it important to put it in the context. So there were a couple of things going on last calendar year. There was the programme for government being published, and it was setting out a commitment for the first tranche of our new £2 billion low carbon fund. And also the Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force had been meeting, discussing, forming its recommendations over the last while. And they were due to publish their report and recommendations on the 1st of October 2020. And included in those recommendations, and we anticipated it was a call for a national programme of investment. So in the midst of those things going on, in the background, the Scottish Government, we made the case for a programme of investment as part of the low carbon fund, and we were successful in securing a budget for that. And the upshot of that was the £50 million budget, and the announcement of the fund happened on the 16th of December 2020. And just, it's also worth saying thanks to the Scottish Land Commission for the additional comms they did around that. It really did capture people's attention in some of the mainstream newspapers and things like that. So next slide, please. So then moving on from the December announcement, in the background, fairly busy time. We got our ducks in order to be able to open the new programme of investment up to applications from any Scottish local authority and also Clyde Gateway Urban Regeneration Company. They're an important regeneration stakeholder in Scotland, very important. And so that happened in March 2021. We managed an application process, which Harry will describe later, but that got us to the point on the 10th of September, we've been able to announce the 10 projects that Tom Arthur just referred to. And also concurrently, we at that point issued the call for the next round of applications. And so there's probably people on this call thinking about applications for next year's funding. Next slide, please. So just in terms of the strategic context, aims and objectives, I've included here a quote that was used, I think it was in December, it was from Aileen Campbell. And there was a nice quote from Andrew Thin at the time as well, but I didn't manage to fit that on the slide. But it sort of recognised that the issue of vacant and derelict land in Scotland, there's a huge amount, over 11,000 hectares of registered vacant and derelict land in Scotland. It's a problem, it's a blight on communities, especially in disadvantaged areas, but it also offers up huge opportunity to be reused in really positive ways. And I guess that's why we're here today. So Aileen Campbell's quote is talking about the 50 million programme helping us to transform Scotland's vacant and derelict land as part of a green recovery that supports all communities. And that message around our journey to net zero by 2045 is also intertwined with that. The final part of that quote is targeting our investment into disadvantaged areas is quite an important thing. We've this year established a place-based investment programme that's backed with £325 million. Again, it's being delivered in partnership with councils, communities, other partners. And so these things are hand in hand, really, they're not separate things. So it's about targeting our investment into the areas that need it most, revitalising our communities, our town centres, delivering on our ambitions around 20-minute neighbourhoods. And I suppose within all that sort of stuff is also, in terms of Tom Arthur's portfolio interest, we've got the community wealth building aspect of things. And wellbeing is high on the agenda for Scottish Government as well into this new Parliament. So next slide, please, Claire. So Shona already mentioned at the start. Shona, we could hear you up to this point. That it was a task force recommendation to establish the National Programme of Investment, and I've included the quote from that recommendation, but the second part of the quote I've put in bold the 4 pillars of action, because that's what we've run with this programme. It's around urban green spaces, community-led regeneration, low carbon housing and renewable energy, and supported by a multi-year funding package to stimulate investment. So that's what we're working with, and that's what we're doing now. Next slide, please, Claire. So the Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force had particularly been keen to tackle the most stuck sites. So they're called dusty sites. They've been derelict urban sites since 2000 or earlier. And we're really keen that this programme of investment can unblock those sites. They're the ones that are most problematic in Scotland. They're the ones that have that provide the best opportunity to deliver green regeneration and inclusive growth where it's needed. And then the second point there, community involvement's a really crucial part of what we're doing here. We've modelled the delivery of the Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme on the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, which we've been running since 2014. And that's a fund which crucially, again, involves communities in the development of proposals. So it's local aspirations and needs that are put forward to Scottish Government and other funding partners, putting the case forward for regenerating local communities based on those local needs and aspirations. And that's important in this Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme as well. So can I see the next slide, please? Now, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole of naming what projects need to be like. And I would say that the Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme is open-minded if it was a person. We've had some really exciting project proposals already in the first round, and it was at short notice. But really, as long as the proposals that come forward are within the aims and objectives of the fund, and maybe Harry could add the link to the guidance that we've published on our website, if you could pop that into the chat, that provides much more detail in all of the stuff I'm talking about now. But some of the example project types that we may expect to see in the years ahead are around generation of renewable energy or heat, or both, green spaces and parkland, community growing spaces and allotments, meanwhile initiatives, urban farms, local nature reserves, community woodland, low carbon affordable housing, low carbon commercial and industrial developments, and sustainable urban drainage and flood prevention measures. But I think an important point really to emphasise here is innovation. There's so many things that can be done with these sites across Scotland that will be innovative, transformative, and benefit communities. Could we see the next slide, please? So this is the budget profile, and I think an important point to make, it's 50 million over 5 years, and in the context of Scotland having 11,000 hectares of vacant and derelict land, this isn't going to do it all by itself. This fund is about acting as a catalyst for activity, for culture change, and for other inward investment. And I have to say, I've had some quite encouraging conversations with certain councils that are starting to build up their resources and their plans, because we've got this long-term commitment of funding for VDLIP. They're now thinking, right, here's our opportunity to start bringing stuff forward, and that we hope will start to bring in that culture of other funders and communities getting more involved with the opportunities that exist around land. The profile of the budget as I say, is over 5 years. It ramps up 5, 10, 15, 15 million. And the reason for that was we launched the fund earlier this year to fund projects this year. So it's quite short notice. Again, it's relatively short notice in terms of next year's funding, but we're expecting the fund will mature to a point where there'll be high demand from across Scotland, and we're really keen to receive more proposals from right across Scotland to really sort of realise the opportunities that exist here. So next slide, please. And I think that's the point that I will hand over to my colleague Harry, who's also helping to deliver the fund.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll just round off by running through the application process and the kind of timeline that we're working towards at the moment. So as Michael's mentioned already, the funding is open to all local authorities and the Clyde Gateway. And it's also worth mentioning that organisations are able to submit more than one application if they wish to. If you do that, you'll be asked to prioritise your projects as part of the application form. And there's kind of full details for that available in the guidance that we shared, and we'd be happy to discuss that as well. Looking towards the application process itself, it takes place over 2 stages. So the panel will consider every application at stage 1, and at that stage we'll invite the successful applicants to submit a more detailed proposal for stage 2, and we can offer feedback to everyone else. So as Michael mentioned, that kind of follows the model for the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, which some of you might be familiar with. If we can just jump to the last slide now. We've opened the funding for this year, so for the financial year 2022 to 2023, and the stage 1 deadline is the 12th of November. We'll be able to get back to people by the end of this year, and we're looking to have the stage 2 applications in by the end of February, with a view to announcing the projects in March. So again, this is a more condensed timeline than what we're working towards. So throughout next year, for the 2023 and 2024 funding, we'll run it based on what we hope will become the normal timeline, where, as we outline on the slide just there, we take the initial applications through the spring and offer feedback in the summer, and take the full stage 2 applications towards the end of the year, with a view to announce the projects at the start of 2023, ahead of the start of that financial year, so that everyone has as much time as possible to deliver on the work that they've put forward. So I can see that a few questions have come in already, but I think we've got time for that at the end. So I'll hand back to Shona now.
Thanks, Michael and Harry. That was really informative and useful. And I can see some questions starting to come in there, which is great. And please do keep them coming in the chat function. We will come on to them once we finish with the panel session. But for now, I want to introduce our next speaker, who is Deryck Irving. Now, Deryck is the Director of Strategy and Development with the Green Action Trust, and he has 35 years experience working in the environmental sector. That's a long time, Deryck. As well as being a member of the Vacant and Derelict Land Task Force, Deryck is also part of the panel who is going to be assessing applications to the new fund. So he's going to spend a bit of time talking to us just now about what kind of support is available out there to local authorities who might be thinking about putting an application together for the next round. So Deryck, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shona, and good afternoon, everyone. That's very kind of you to say how old I was at the beginning, Shona. That's really helpful. As Shona mentioned, I've actually been directly involved in both the task force and the investment panel. But I want to say something very, very briefly about the Green Action Trust, and I'll come back to it later on. Some of you will know the Green Action Trust in its former guise as Central Scotland Green Network Trust. We are Scotland's leading environmental regeneration charity, so we're looking at the regeneration of land for environmental, social and economic benefit. We have a long history of working on vacant and derelict land, primarily in central Scotland, in fact, primarily in the west of central Scotland, because that's where most of the vacant and derelict land is. And we're continuing on with that process. So I'm going to be very, very quick, because I'm aware we have a limited amount of time this afternoon. I'd be more interested in dealing with people's questions than my thoughts. I thought I'd say something briefly about why we're keen on the investment programme and what it's seeking to achieve. There's a number of factors. The fact that it targets the role of vacant and derelict land in tackling the twin crises of climate change and nature loss is absolutely crucial. It's starting from a different point to where we've been in the past. The fact it highlights community benefit and it highlights multifunctional solutions. And that helps us to move into that new way of thinking. The fact it's multi-year and it's got the increasing ramp of scale, I think is a model that we should see in more government funding. Question there from Rob McIntosh. We have done a lot north of Central Belt, but we have mapped opportunities up through Angus and parts of Highland as well. So we can talk about that afterwards. The fact that the investment programme is aiming to develop a pipeline of projects, that multi-year ramped approach allows things to happen in a more planned and sensible. So we're not looking at single year, go for it. We're actually thinking across a period of time. And as Michael mentioned, the fact that this is a catalyst for new ways of working. The task force was very, very keen to start to think about vacant and derelict land as a resource, not a problem, as an opportunity, not a blight. So it's a long way to get to that point, but that's the way we need to be thinking. Our take on what's possible with the funding, and again, it's rubbing back over what Mike had in his long list there. There's a range of projects which prioritise climate action, whether that's mitigation, whether it's adaptation, or whether it's actually working with communities, businesses and places to increase their resilience with climate change as a challenge. There's projects which primarily prioritise biodiversity, benefits for wildlife, or actually people and their access to wildlife in areas where that's limited. And crucially, blue-green infrastructure as a way of unlocking sites for other uses, but to have end uses which are then better and greener than they would have been without that intervention. So it's looking at new types of development which are better places, more resilient places, climate ready and net zero as part of it. So this is a way of actually changing business as usual, which I think is absolutely crucial. In terms of support, it strikes me that given this is coming out through local authorities and through the Clyde Gateway, there's a huge amount of resource and knowledge there, around the vacant and derelict land bit of the question. And where it's most likely that people are going to be needing support is in the understanding how we move into this new green thinking, net zero, twin crisis type of approach. There's a lot of support there on the specifics of those things. So there are government-based agencies, there's SEPA, there's Nature Scot, there's Scottish Forestry, there's Forest and Land Scotland for those solutions. There's Zero Waste Scotland and along the lines of circular economies and some of the energy side of things. But we understand that actually the challenge is very often not the request about the specifics, it's getting the capacity to understand what the specifics are you want to ask about. And there are a couple of places where you could begin to go in this phase, and certainly in the later phases of this fund. The Green Action Trust, so ourselves, and Development Trusts Alliance Scotland, DTAS, both have existing vacant and derelict land programmes aiming at supporting this type of development amongst others. And particularly trying to provide capacity to help local authorities to work with communities on these projects, or local authorities to work with environmental aspects built into the benefits. In both cases, as organisations, we have limits on what we can offer. We have geographic constraints on certain things. We have a set amount of capacity, but we are both looking to expand that capacity and offer more to more people moving forward. And I can't speak for details, but certainly in our case, in the short term, we can offer bespoke contract-based support, even if we haven't got the capacity to offer it for free at the moment. So we're more than happy to sit down and help you to start to develop your pipeline of projects that will be the ones that start to move into this process. And probably I've got very little to say beyond that, actually, so I can hand back to Shona.
Great, thanks, Deryck, and as ever, informative and lots of food for thought there, I think, and an offer of support, I think, which I know a lot of people will find it really valuable. So I'm looking at the chat here, and I can see a lot of questions starting to come through, which is great. I think we're in for a good discussion this afternoon, so do keep them coming. But before that, we're going to want to introduce our final panelists for today, Adam and John. Now, Adam is a funding and development officer with, I think I've got that right, with South Lanarkshire Council, and John is the chair of the Clyde Cycle Park. And both Adam and John were part of one of the first successful bids in the first round of the Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme. So I'm really looking forward to hearing a bit more about the project, but also about their experience of going through the funding round. So can I hand over to you now, Adam and John?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to talk a wee bit about the process, and then John will go on to talk about the project, but we'll try not to take up too much time so we get on to the question section later. Overall, we found the process really well set out by the Scottish Government. The application was really informative, as well as the guidance, in telling us what we needed to do, how to do it, what kind of information they were looking for. We as a local authority, actually, although the application is a two-stage one, we actually set up a short expression of interest round internally, and it was quite useful in initially sifting some of the ideas that we as an experienced funding team didn't think would be suitable. So that kind of prevented people from sending in loads of stage one applications that weren't a good fit with with what the fund was looking to do. In terms of the feedback that we got from stage one, that was really useful in helping to shape the stage two bid. So I think in terms of prospective applicants, really utilised that feedback from stage one, because it was vital in helping us build a bid at stage two that was successful. In our experience, and John will perhaps touch on this as well, the capacity of the group itself was critical. Clyde Cycle Park are a really experienced group with an incredible skill set within them. So we as a local authority kind of took less of a leading role in development of the bid. We were more of a critical partner in terms of giving them advice and guidance on the types of project that we thought would be successful and what would tie in well with South Lanarkshire's own economic recovery and vacant and derelict land strategy and policy. So the group themselves led on it. The application itself, we felt it was good to have the familiarity with the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund. It was good to see applications laid out in a sort of way that we had experience of doing before. It kind of helped the process go a bit more smoothly, I felt, than it would have been for a brand new application that was kind of all new to us. In terms of the strategic fit of the fund and how we as a local authority kind of see it benefiting us in the long run, kind of tying into that kind of long-term plan that was mentioned earlier, it fits with the place-based investment programme that Michael mentioned, particularly around securing land and buildings and making sure they're brought into effective use. And like I said, it also aligns with South Lanarkshire Council's economic recovery plan, of which our commitment to improving vacant and derelict land within South Lanarkshire is a key part. Also, community wealth building is an important thing for South Lanarkshire Council going forward. So to see that quite heavily embedded within the application and the fund itself was really useful. It helped us to kind of see how this, as a long-term fund, could be put towards improving some of the things that we recognise within the local authority that we could be working on in the years to come in terms of vacant and derelict land. I think that's kind of all I've got to say about the application process, but John will be able to give you a really good overview of the project, which is probably the more interesting part. It's a really excellent project, so he'll tell you all about it.
Okay, thanks very much, Adam. And good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for the opportunity to talk about our experience with the Vacant and Derelict Land Investment Programme. I'm just going to share the screen, and I hope that's visible to everybody. Okay, I'm the chair of the Clyde Cycle Park SCIO. It's very much a community organisation, partnership, principally between Cambuslang Community Council, which I also chair, East Kilbride Road Club, which is a cycle club in the area, and a community development trust called Healthy and Happy. But importantly, South Lanarkshire Council and South Lanarkshire Leisure and Culture are also partners in the in the SCIO. So it's a project that's been developed in response to lack of sports facilities in the area, and to help promote the economic development of the area. Now, this is, in a sense, it's probably a sort of classic example of the kind of sites that Mike and Harry were talking about. It's an 8.25 hectare site on the banks of the Clyde. For those of you who know Cambuslang, the road at the top is Boglestoll Road leading to the M74. It's got a number of challenges, euphemistically phrased. It's been historically used for dumping slag from the Clyde Bridge Steelworks. And you can see in the photograph that it's transected by overhead power cables. So for one reason or another, it wasn't attractive for commercial or residential development, and it's progressively become rewilded. But it's of an ideal size, location, close to the M74 and so on, for development as a cycle park. And there isn't a major cycle park in the west of Scotland. In fact, there is only one major cycle park in Scotland, which is the Fife Cycle Park. So there were a whole series of opportunities. It was part of land assembled by Scottish Enterprise, former mining and other sites in the area, and it was one of the last remaining brownfield sites that was available. And Scottish Enterprise have to pay tribute to their huge support in terms of helping us get this project off the ground, and we're at the moment in the process of acquiring title to the land. Now, in terms of Clyde Cycle Park, the objectives here is to create a major cycling and sports centre serving the west of Scotland, and it sort of tries to address a whole series of objectives, inspiring people in the community, which has got a significant health and physical activity issues, so sort of health, active travel issues. The standard that we're aspiring to in the cycle park is international standard, to be able to hold a road race and other types of international events in the future, so promoting the sport. Essentially, though, creating a facility that's open to the community, so very much about inclusivity. But given where we are, close to 3 motorway junctions, there is a phenomenal reach in terms of accessibility to the west of Scotland and the Central Belt. Crucially, it's also about linking in with other cycling and sports facilities, the Chris Hoy Velodrome, the Cathkin Mountain Bike Centre, the Cunningar Forest Park facilities, potentially other ones in the future at Strathclyde Country Park. And fundamentally, it's also, as I said, about regeneration. It's about promoting local economic development in Cambuslang, bringing income into the area, creating new employment opportunities. Just to give you an idea, this is rotating the aerial photograph that you saw earlier on its side with the river along the top. This is a sort of an initial master plan of the site, a series of interlocking circuits, clubhouse, pavilion, and cycle park, which is sort of currently being used as the basis for the work. Importantly, in terms of the vacant derelict land investment program funding, this is how it fits in with the evolution of the project. South Lanarkshire Council were instrumental in helping us get the project up to ground with the sort of feasibility study funding, that sort of small scale funding, which is so often critical for community projects. But the really major breakthrough has come over the last year with support from the Clyde Mission Fund, but supported by some funding from Scottish Enterprise and the Vacant and Derelict Land Fund through South Lanarkshire Council for site investigation. As in a lot of sites in the west of Scotland, you need to know obviously what lies beneath, so that's been really critical. And it's enabled us to create a first cycle circuit. But the VDLIP has really enabled us to take a really big step forward with an allocation of funding of 294,000. Which is going to help us complete a lot of the site preparation activities, do groundwater investigation, remediation work, fencing, and crucially connecting us to utilities. And that's been important in terms of helping to unlock other funding from Sport Scotland, and from a local waste and quarry company called Patterson's. If I reflect on what the benefits were of VDLIP, firstly, in terms of the application process, it's sort of flexible fund. I have to say, it was a clear application form. It takes quite a lot of work, but it's well structured. It's relatively straightforward to complete. You know what goes where. Pretty much, it sets out what needs to go on the tin. And it's had an important catalytic function. For a community group, it also has helped us get sort of credibility with other funders, as I said, with Sport Scotland. And in terms of the benefits that we had in preparing the application, the point that Adam made about having a critical friend was really valuable. South Lanarkshire Council provided that, but we also had really good advice from Green Action Trust, one of Deryck's colleagues, Mike Batley, NHS Lanarkshire, Sustrans and Scottish Enterprise, given the different objectives that we're aiming at. So getting all those inputs while we were developing the proposal was really valuable, because they helped us take different, opened our eyes to different ways of thinking about the project. Okay, that's a very quick run through, and this is basically what the first phase looks like. It's always nice to see what a project looks like. This is our first 250-meter cycle circuit, which we're going to extend now by a further kilometre beyond that. But the value of this also is being able to have something tangible where we can bring the community, we can bring cycle clubs and involve them progressively in the next stages of the project. Thanks very much. Hope we've more or less kept to time, but thanks for the opportunity.
Right, great. That was great, Adam. That was really, really interesting. I enjoyed that. So we've had some really interesting presentations now, and hopefully it's given everybody lots of inspiration and lots of ideas. But I really do want to open this up to the audience now and hear what you think. So I am going to open the floor up to questions. We've probably got about we've probably only got about 15 minutes, but we'll do our best to get through as many of them as we can. Looking at the chat function there, I can see immediately that there's something coming through. There's a bit of a theme coming through around about this urban-rural idea, and a couple of people asking about whether the fund is open to rural projects as well as urban projects. And I think somebody's saying, is it just the big stuck central belt sites that they're interested in here? I think maybe if I direct that one towards Michael, are you the best person to answer that one?
Yeah, I can have a go. I do appreciate that perspective. I sort of sometimes imagine if I lived in a rural area, and I live in Glasgow, by the way. If I was living in a rural area and I was looking at Glasgow, I might have that perspective. I understand it, but it is a fund that's open to all of Scotland's local authorities, and it does recognise that there are sites that may be eligible in all of those local authority areas. And also back to my earlier point on the place-based investment programme, that also is being delivered right across Scotland with funding that's been allocated to councils. So certainly we would expect there will be place-based approaches to regeneration right across Scotland, rural and urban. And just another point to add, I mentioned earlier that we've modelled the delivery of this fund on the Regeneration Capital Grant Fund, and it has really delivered a lot of stuff in rural and remote rural areas, tackling those issues around rurality. So I don't think we would, certainly don't think we'd be trying to put rural projects coming forward, project proposals. We're happy to look at them. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. I don't know if anyone's got anything to add to that.
Thanks, Michael. A clear message there then, that don't be put off if you are in a rural area. This is for you too. The other theme that I can see coming through in some of the questions is about this idea that the fund being only open to local authorities and the Clyde Gateway. And I think that's pretty clear from the guidance that the lead applicant does need to be a local authority or the Clyde Gateway. So what I thought might be quite helpful would be to maybe come to John actually, to get some perspectives from you about how easy it's been for you as a community organisation to work with local authority to bring forward what is what is a community-led project, but to work through the local authority to get the funding for that. Have you got anything you can add to that? Any tips?
I suppose so. I mean, we've built up both through Clyde Cycle Park and some of the other partners like Cambuslang Community Council. We've built up relationships probably over the last 6 or 7 years. So we know a lot of the key people, obviously in Adam's team, but also in other key parts in sort of roads, transportation, environment, planning over the years. And so not that we always see eye to eye, but we we have different interests, but I think we've got a sort of pretty good working relationship. And the key role for the local authority for us has been, firstly, the critical friend that right from the start, and saying, well, these are the kind of things you should be thinking about. Secondly, but also acting as our bankers, if you like, because there's huge cash flow issues that you have to navigate as on a construction projects or other projects of this type. And as partners, they give you extra credibility. We've been able to draw on their engineers for some technical advice at times on costing. But we're quite fortunate as a community group that we have a fair spread of expertise. People who are used to putting in grant applications in other arenas in their professional life. I think community groups that didn't have that could well struggle. And that's where I think the capacity of the local authority to support that would be critical. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that, John. I wonder if Adam has any reflections on that as well. And I'm just looking through the chat there. I see Caroline has asked a question there about development grants and how useful it would be to have development grants as part of this. Now, I don't think that is part of the fund at the moment, but I wonder if if Adam might be able to reflect on sort of the role of the local authorities and how local authorities, how you have been able to work with John and his group to help that application come forward.
Yeah, so you'll have seen in the slides that John prepared that this project's been going on for a good few years with council involvement at various stages. South Lanarkshire Council are lucky enough to have money come in from the renewable energy funds from the wind farm, which in the very start of this project, that they were successful in applying to that to fund the feasibility stage of the project. So I think in terms of community groups that are thinking about applying to the VDLIP, maybe working with your local authority, most of them do have a funding team of some sort, kind of identify potential funders that might be able to fund that very initial stage of your work around feasibility would be quite useful. I know that not all local authorities do have the kind of renewable energy fund or equivalent, but people within your local authority funding team are similar, will hopefully be able to point in the direction of the kind of funds that would help you carry out that work as a sort of foot in the door before you actually make your full application to the VDLIP. I hope that would be useful in terms of any community groups that are thinking about taking a project forward.
Thanks, Adam. I think then I'll probably come to Michael and perhaps you as well, Harry, for the next one. Sarah Hamill has asked a question about whether the money from the fund can be used to carry out site investigations, so remediation work if that's necessary. Is that something that the money could be used for?
So yeah, Harry shared a link earlier with the guidance. I think it's the headline link with the guidance, and it's also got a frequently asked questions section in there. I think we've covered that there. So Sarah, please have a look at that. But I think the answer to the question is that the investment panel, when they're receiving applications at stage 1 and stage 2, are wanting a proposal that sets out the end-to-end plan for the site and the role of the VDLIP investment in unlocking that site and that end use. Recognise this is part of the low carbon fund. We're really keen to see innovation and responding to those net zero ambitions that we've got alongside place-based regeneration, etc. So I think if the panel saw a proposal that's just about having a look around the site and seeing what might be possible, that's probably too early, I think would be safe to say.
Thanks, Michael. I'm afraid I'm going to pick on you again. There's a couple of quite technical questions coming through about the fund itself and what kind of projects might be eligible. So try and bundle them up together if I can. I think the first one there is about whether social housing projects might be eligible. And then there's also a question about the size of sites that might be eligible. Is there a cut-off? I know that the Vacant and Derelict Land Register cuts off at 0.1 of a hectare. I'm not sure if the fund does. So a couple of technical questions there can I put your way.
Again, I think I'm certain it's in our guidance, and I think we've set it as 0.1, as you said, Shona. To answer the second question first, social housing projects, I'm not entirely sure where Michael's coming from. I don't think we changed the guidance at all fundamentally on anything. So yeah, there may be potential for a project proposal to be brought forward in partnership between a council and, for example, a housing association to reuse vacant and derelict land. I don't know if that answers Michael's question. And sorry, Michael, if I've misrepresented what you asked, but happy to take that one offline if I've missed the point.
Thanks, Michael. I know it's a nightmare when you're expected to remember the details of a technical document live on air, so that's a bit cruel. I'm going to actually come to Deryck next, because I think there's a question in here in my mind actually about the type of sites that we're talking about here are often the kind of sites that have traditionally been seen as problems rather than as opportunities. And I know that that's something you've talked about quite a lot. Do you think that we need to change our mindset to tackle them? And if we do, if there is a need for a sort of culture change, a mindset change, what does that actually look like?
Yeah, it's the short answer is yes, I do. I think we do. I think I probably said that earlier. I noticed there's a few questions in there about the issues of land ownership, and I think those are elements of the system that the fund isn't going to solve, and actually even a mindset of those of us actively involved isn't necessarily going to solve. That there are bigger systemic changes which are under discussion around compulsory sales orders and these sorts of things too, which have been mentioned. And I think that there's an overall package that says actually we're not willing to let this resource sit as it is. The first meeting of the VDL task force, can't remember who it was, but somebody said, how can we possibly have this amount of land doing nothing? And it's that mindset we should be having. That says, it's not a predestined, predefined part of our landscape. It could be something else. I think there are genuinely challenges to change, but unless we do make that shift from where we are now to where we want to be, we've got sites that are 50, 60 years old, more, and we've got a register that drops very, very slightly each year, but would probably take 3 centuries to disappear at its current attrition rate. So we have to do something dramatically different. And if we start to think about spaces and sites as being an asset that should be in productive use, then that's the only way we can take it forward. So it's fairly simple. If I can steal the talking stick briefly, because Michael said something about how the panel looks at applications. I think the point he made was fine, was sound. If we're looking at something that's feasibility or looking around the site to see what's possible and we can't see where it would subsequently go, that's likely to be the challenge. I think I reviewed a little bit in myself about my comments on the first round of applications, and I think the things that people need to be bringing forward are sites which are genuinely about green recovery. So it's innovation, and Michael's mentioned that several times. Sites that genuinely involve the people who are affected, so the communities in the widest sense. There was definitely a view that anything that was multifunctional with multiple benefits was much more likely to be attractive, so that there's an element there. Making it absolutely clear how sites meet the priorities, and that going back to that question about the smaller sites, they're not on the register. So if you're going to apply for a smaller site, you have to at least let us know that it's been derelict for a long time, even if you can't show it on the register. That type of discussion went round around the table a few times. And I think the other thing is just to be absolutely clear about what you're claiming in terms of outcomes and legacy. And at risk of sounding critical of people who are probably in this mix, the first statement in what is the legacy of this project cannot be there won't be vacant and derelict land anymore, because that's a removal of blight. It should be this is what's going to happen because of what we've done. So it's about language. You've got to set this on fire. If we're looking at potentially hundreds of applications, the ones that jump out to us are the ones that are going to show how they change and impact on people, rather than the ones that are technically detailed and things like that. So anyway, that's my piece. I'll shut up.
It's helpful, Deryck, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna start wrapping up quite soon, but I do see a question there in the chat before we finished around our ownership issues, and which are, as we know, often part of the problem with derelict land, and a question about when will we see compulsory sales orders and reform of CPO being brought forward. Unless any of the panel wave at me furiously, I'm not actually going to put that to the panel, because I think it's probably one. It's probably one for ministers and politicians rather than this panel. But I wanted to read it out because I wanted to acknowledge just how important it is. So I'm not seeing anybody waving madly. So I am going to start trying to wrap it up now. And what I'd like to do before we do that is just to ask an open question, I suppose, to any member of the panel, and reflecting back on your experiences so far of the first round of funding. And what would your sort of top tip be for anybody who's maybe sitting out there in the audience thinking about putting together an application for the next round? So can I start with, can I go to Adam first? Sorry to pick on you, Adam.
Oh dear, that is out of the blue. I think what Deryck was talking about there, to make sure that you have an idea that you think is going to bring genuine benefit to the community, and it's got genuine community buy-in as well. That's what the local authority wanted to see as well. We want to see that our communities are invested in the idea, that they've been involved in its development and are genuinely supportive of it. So I think for any applicant, that would be quite useful to look at, how what you're proposing perhaps ties into strategies and economic plans that the council have in place, things like that. The strategic fit of whatever you want to do is of a lot of interest to the local authority as well. So I think having a good eye on that kind of information from the local authority would be useful.
Thanks, Adam, that's really helpful. I am going to pick on Michael again now, I'm afraid, because I know he's really close to this and he's been thinking about it very, very hard. So Michael, have you got any top tips you want to add before we wind up?
Yeah, maybe a couple, in fact. Top tips, I think, we launched this at very short notice for applications, and it was in tandem with the launch of the place-based investment programme. Top tip, or I suppose a request, is for lead applicants to be looking down the line, not just the shovel-ready stuff, but thinking, what can we bring forward into this pipeline? And then the second one is, I suppose, kind of on a sort of housekeeping point, we are happy to take any questions about the guidance. There's been some really good questions in here, that a couple I think we haven't answered. vdlip@gov.scot will be happy to answer anything that anyone's got to ask about the guidance that we've published, and hopefully can clarify some stuff, because we're not trying to limit people applying to this fund by any elements of that guidance. Maybe just some things can be clarified. So hopefully that's all right.
Great, thank you, Michael. So a really clear and helpful offer there from Michael, that if there are any technical questions that we haven't got to today, please do get in touch direct. And I know Michael and the team will be really pleased to help. So I think that's brought us to the end of what I think has been a really interesting session. So I really just want to wrap up by saying a really big thanks to everybody on the panel. You've all done a really great job, and it's been really, really interesting. And thanks also to everybody who's contributed in the chat, and to my colleagues behind the scenes doing technical stuff. Hopefully you're all going to go away now and feeling enthused and inspired, and put together some really fantastic applications for the next round. I think that brings us to the end, and because this is the final session of the conference over the last few days, I am going to hand over to our chairman, Andrew Finn, now, who's going to wrap it up and conclude proceedings. So, Andrew.
Shona, thank you very much indeed. That actually has been a really interesting hour. I've really enjoyed that. Thank you. That does sadly bring our conference to an end. And in many ways, I'm sorry about that, though many of those who've worked really hard to make it happen are probably quite relieved. But we've had 12 sessions over 3 days. We've had 54 speakers, and we've had over 1,400 people attending, which is a pretty encouraging result, if I can call it that. And certainly the last 3 days have been a huge opportunity for the Land Commission, no question of that. An opportunity to share our thinking, to test our thinking, to explore other people's thinking, and to be challenged and held to account. And that is very important to us. We want to be challenged. We want to be held to account, because that's how we'll improve the quality of what we do. And especially in a small organization that is trying so hard to be both evidence-driven and at the cutting edge of new thinking and innovation about land reform, we need that challenge. So thank you to everyone. We've had a pretty remarkable breadth of discussion. We've covered issues around natural capital and the just transition, which is probably a subject in itself. The Land Commission could just devote a year or two to that. And we've had a session on community wealth building, another subject where actually we could probably also spend a year or so working. We've discussed the housing land market, which, if ever there was an intergenerational injustice, housing must be pretty close to the top of that list. And I suspect history will judge us harshly if we don't really grapple with that. Now we've just published some pretty punchy advice, so let's hope that that is considered further. We've had a session on place pioneers. We've had a session, and I think an important session on land rights and responsibilities. A new idea that was really pushed in the 2016 Land Reform Bill. And of course, it remains the case that land rights are legal rights. Land responsibilities that go with those rights remain non-legal, non-binding, and sometimes not adhered to as much as they could be. And so we also had a session on landowners leading, and I cannot underline the importance of landowners leading. Actually, in this country, as with any other part of society, the vast majority of landowners are good people trying to do the right thing. And we are doing our level best to help them. But it is so important that landowners take up that challenge to provide real leadership as we change things in Scotland. And lastly, second lastly, we had a session on new models of land ownership and governance, which I think is important. We look abroad, things are done differently. Why shouldn't they here? And of course, lastly, we've just had a session on vacant and derelict land, which has been great. So we've got a pretty busy work program ahead of all that. We've got to make sense of it. We've got to translate it into practical and pragmatic recommendations. No use theorizing here. We've got to produce advice that works. We'll do our best to live up to that. Please encourage us, please challenge us, please advise us, and certainly hold us to account to deliver. But above all, can we think about this? Can we think about land reform and the place of land reform in building a modern 21st century Scotland? Because land reform in all its various dimensions, and we've explored a lot of them over the last 3 days, in all its various dimensions, land reform is central, I think, to the success of our country going forward. I don't think anyone can be in any doubt about this now. It's not a fringe interest. We desperately need to modernize, to learn from others, and then to do even better. And we've done that before. You look at the access legislation that we produced in 2003-04, suddenly leapt Scotland to the front of the game. But in many other respects, we're still behind the curve, and we need to catch up and then get onto the front foot. And for that to happen, we're going to have to share this thinking and the thinking in this conference with a much wider audience, please. So let's avoid the temptation to talk only among ourselves, to talk only with those who share our perspective, and Twitter and all the rest of it, I'm afraid, encourage us to do that. And let's avoid the temptation to use words and jargon and language that only we understand. It's really unhelpful. Let's get out there, talk with other people, both in and on their terms, and let's listen to what other people are saying, because people have different perspectives, and we need to build a real consensus about what land ownership and use should look like and will look like in a modern 21st century Scotland. Mutual understanding, agreement, and consensus will deliver progress. I have no doubt about that, but I have equally no doubt that disagreement and division and conflict will deliver decline, and you can see that. History tells you that. You can see it today, not so far from here. Thank you again to everyone, and especially, I really do mean this, to the remarkable staff at the Land Commission. We only have a dozen or so folk. It's amazing what they do. Have a safe journey to your kitchen or your teapot or both. And have a relaxing evening. Have a wonderful evening.